What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome back into the Country Roads Webcast. As always, I'm your host, Jordan Cruz. And before I get into this video, I just want to hit you guys with a quick reminder. If you would, give us a thumbs up. Hitting that like button really helps this video a ton. Hit the YouTube algorithm. Gets it pushed out to more people. So like I always like to say, it helps us and it helps you, as does hitting the subscribe button, because it pushes out more of this Mountaineer content to Mountaineer Nation. And we really appreciate that here on the Country Roads Webcast. Having said that, let's get into it. And as we get into it, I'm sure video game fans that, like me, grew up playing the NCAA football video game series have long awaited its return. If you're a fan of WVU football, I'm sure you're a big fan of college football as well. So for me, I'm not a huge video game person, but the one video game I always did get into was the college football games because that's my favorite sport. I love it so much, and so I've missed it for well over a decade. So this past week, I was super ecstatic to finally get the release of a teaser trailer for the upcoming game, supposed to be slated to release this summer, and because of that, it got me super excited to think about playing with WVU, getting to use, Garrett Green, Jaheim White, all these guys. It's going to be super fun. West Virginia is going to be a really tough team on the game, a fun team to play with like we were back in the day when we had, Pat White and Steve Slayton. A lot of people used West Virginia on the video game then. I think West Virginia will be a team that a lot of people use in this upcoming game as well. And we'll talk more about what some of those pieces may look like in the upcoming video game, talking about Garrett Green and Jaheim White and some others towards the tail end of this video. But that got me thinking about some of the West Virginia players that we missed out on getting a chance to play with on the video game since it's been since 2013, the last game released. This one's going to be releasing in 2024. So that's a decade's worth of WVU teams that we missed out on. So I just wanted to highlight a handful of those teams. I pulled up some of the rosters on NCAA football 14, that is, on the Xbox 360. They have still been updating the rosters online every year for most years throughout that game. I've been playing it pretty steadily since I guess about 2018. And so, that's how much I love the college football video game series. But on the screen, I'm going to flash through some of these rosters once I get to some of those that I was able to pull up on there. I have the 2016 roster, the 2018 roster, the 2020 roster, and then I want to take a look at what last year's roster could have looked like, the 2023 roster on an NCAA football game, and then we'll talk about this upcoming game here releasing this summer, what some WVU players might be rated. I feel like we have some West Virginia players that could be highly rated, so we'll talk about that towards the tail end. But before we get into some of those years where I have the roster attached to it, I want to talk about the numbers from some of those that I don't have the roster for and some of those players that we would have liked to see, and that starts in 2014. The last NCAA football game we had released was titled NCAA Football 14, but as we know, the year goes ahead of the actual year of release. So like this year's game's releasing in 2024, it's going to be titled College Football 25. So the 2014 West Virginia Mountaineers, we never got a chance to see on a video game, so we missed out on some players that could have been standouts on that game. Of course, top of the list, obviously, none other than Kevin White, the West Virginia Mountaineers wide receiver, a Biletnikoff finalist that season, robbed of that award, I think, just like Stedman Bailey was a couple years prior to him. Maybe not as egregious of a robbery that happened to Stedman Bailey, but would have loved to get a chance to play with Kevin White on the NCAA football video game. 109 receptions that season for 1,447 yards and 10 touchdowns. And I think just as fun to play with would have been Mario Alford, because not only would he have been dynamic at the receiver position as well with his speed, throw some screens to him, hand him some jet sweeps, but in the return game, and we know he was a kick return weapon for West Virginia that year as well. He had 65 catches for 945 yards. Quarterbacked by, of course, Clint Trickett, who had the Mountaineers off to a really good start. College game day in town for a game against TCU, and then unfortunately, we know what happens with his, helmet getting ripped off, hiding some concussions towards the latter part of the season. And West Virginia, fell off not only in that game against TCU, which they ultimately, unfortunately, lost, but then the latter portion of that season, in which Skylar Howard would step in, and that would mark a new era of West Virginia football. Let's talk a little bit about that now as we take a look at the 2016 West Virginia football roster and what it could have looked like on a college football video game. And as we jump ahead now to 2016, 2015, not a bad year for West Virginia as well. You get 8 wins. You win the bowl game out in Arizona. You get the emergence of David Sills as a wide receiver. In that bowl game, he would leave for this season, then come back to West Virginia in 2017. But this 2016 year always was really special to me because I was a huge fan of Skylar Howard. I think he's one of the most underrated Mountaineers ever. I was a fan of him while he was here. I think he was underappreciated then. I think in hindsight, a lot of people have come around to appreciating him and his performance. So I think you started off here with a couple of things. Number one, you got Will Greer here at West Virginia going through a redshirt year. You could have seen him on the game. Actually, if you look on the roster, they have him listed as a redshirt. That's how advanced these roster updates got for this NCAA football game and how beloved this series is. But for West Virginia, I think Skylar Howard would have been a treat to play with on the game. In 2016, he threw for 3,328 yards with 26 touchdowns, and he also added 463 yards on the ground and another 10 touchdowns. And that's just kind of a tip of the iceberg of what you could see from Garrett Green, getting to see him on the game. So if you look at something like Skylar Howard on this roster, Garrett Green's probably going to be even faster and more highly rated than that. So that's just a little bit of a sneak peek to something we're going to talk about later on in this video. West Virginia with some good running backs on this team: Russell Shell, Kennedy McCoy, very strong rushing attack, Skylar Howard as well, as I said. And then you get into the receivers. Shelton Gibson was an absolute deep threat. He would have been a ton of fun to play with, hitting him on those deep balls, as him and Skylar Howard always connected throughout that 2016 season. 951 yards and 8 touchdowns for him. Da'Keel Shorts was Mr. Consistency. If West Virginia needed a third down, it would be Da'Keel. Nearly 900 yards for him as well, 5 touchdowns. He would have been a reliable, sure-handed receiver on the game there. Karan White, very underrated throughout his West Virginia career. Not as explosive and, of course, not as prolific as his brother Kevin, but very solid career at West Virginia. And in 2016, he had 583 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then you got Javon Durant. After bursting on the scene as a freshman in 2015, kind of took a bit of a step back, but still showcased his speed a lot, 330 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I think with the speed that he had his couple years at West Virginia, he would have been fun to play with on the video game. You had some other young West Virginia receivers that hadn't yet come into their own. They would do that more in 2017 and, of course, 2018, which I'll pull up the roster for that team momentarily as well. But when you flip it over to the defense for this 2016 West Virginia squad, you got to look at a guy like a Justin Arndt. Surprisingly not well rated on the roster, I don't think, but he was a guy that, a standout longtime West Virginia player that committed to the program and stayed throughout his career and finally got his chance and made the most of it in the latter portion of his career and led West Virginia in tackles that year with 84, Al-Rashid Benton, 80 tackles. And then, of course, the one standout player I think on defense we all would have loved to play with and try and lock people down with, Rasul Douglas. 8 interceptions that season, led college football, I believe, or was tied for the lead in college football. Ton of pass deflections as well. He was all over the field for West Virginia that season. Had a feeling he could be an NFL player. Took him a while to finally find his niche in the NFL, but once he has, he's really come into his own at Green Bay, now at Buffalo, and he's an absolute standout cornerback in the NFL. And West Virginia saw the beginning of that in 2016 as we scroll through this 2016 West Virginia roster on NCAA football. I think it's one we all would have loved to play with in hindsight. West Virginia's best season yet in the Big 12 still hasn't been topped this 10-win season they had in 2016. But let's jump ahead to a year that everyone was really excited about. It was really one of the most anticipated West Virginia football seasons in quite some time, and I don't think West Virginia's had one up to this level since then, but I think they're finally going to get it here in 2024. And of course, I'm talking about 2018. Let's take a little bit of a look at the 2018 West Virginia roster and what it could have looked like on an NCAA football video game. And as we get into 2018, I think that obviously the headliner, Will Grier, David Sills, Gary Jennings, that offense that West Virginia had that year, very explosive. West Virginia came into the year highly regarded. They reached all the way up into the top 10 in the country before, suffering the loss to Iowa State. And then a couple down the stretch, and unfortunately the game against Oklahoma didn't turn out West Virginia's way. Down that stretch there, they had a great chance to at least play in the Big 12 championship game. All they had to do was beat Oklahoma State. They were up by, 3 scores, I believe, at halftime. Oklahoma State comes back, so then West Virginia had to face Oklahoma and had to beat them in order to make the Big 12 title game. Couldn't quite get it done, but man, that was an absolute battle between Will Grier and Kyler Murray. 59-56 final, I believe, but really an explosive year for West Virginia offensively. We saw everything Will Grier was, cracked up to be and more. I think in this season, 3,864 yards, 37 touchdowns versus only 8 interceptions. West Virginia's run game headed by Kennedy McCoy and Martell Pettaway. 800 yards rushing for Kennedy McCoy, 600 for Martell Pettaway, while young Letty Brown added 446 yards of his own. So, despite the fact that this was, a West Virginia team that was prolific through the air, I think on the game, you could have still had some fun with, a multitude of running backs to use. You could have been balanced attacking people on the game. And of course, when we talk about the receivers, I mentioned David Sills and Gary Jennings. Amazing year for both of them. 986 yards for Sills, 15 touchdowns. 917 yards for Jennings, 13 touchdowns. 699 yards and 2 touchdowns for the speedy Marcus Sims as a deep threat. And Trevon Wesco with, the best receiving performance by West Virginia tight end up until this past season when Cole Taylor finally, surpassed that and did something we haven't seen a West Virginia tight end do in, decades. but Trevon Wesco, 366 yards that season as well. He was a good weapon for a West Virginia offense that really spread the ball around a lot. And, Will Greer's 2-year performance at WVU will go down in history, obviously, and he's a player that West Virginia fans would have loved to play with on the game. And I can speak for having played with this roster, actually, because this is around the time I started playing the game, was this 2018 season, and playing online dynasties again with these updated rosters. And it really was fun playing with Will Greer, even on, an older version of the game. So I could only imagine if we were getting to play with it, on a PS5 or something like that, like we're going to get to here this summer. And then, of course, the highlight of that 2018 defense that was really fun to play with all over the field and would have been awesome on a current generation game, David Long. He's making headlines in the NFL now, and he did it at West Virginia as well. He couldn't be blocked. I remember that one game he had, 16 tackles, 18 tackles, and, 7 TFLs, something crazy like that. He was putting up ridiculous numbers that entire season, ended up with 99 total tackles and 6 sacks. So an absolute, stellar career for David Long, and this 2018 team would have been a lot of fun to play with. But let's bounce ahead. Let's take a look at the 2020 version of West Virginia and see what they could have looked like on the video game here as we take a look at their roster before we look at some more current issues. Take a look at the 2023 team, what they could have looked like on the game, and talk about some projections for some ratings for some West Virginia players in the upcoming EA Sports College Football 25 video game releasing this summer. And as we look at the 2020 roster here, I think, this one is a little bit unheralded to me because, it was a 6-4 season for West Virginia. You had the shortened season because the COVID year and everything. I don't think it ended the way that we wanted to there with, some collapses towards the end, that when games that we thought that we could have won and maybe should have won. But this team, when I look back on it, I had a lot of fun watching this team on TV throughout the 2020 season. And, they really, ended up with a winning record. It was Neil Brown's first winning season at West Virginia. And then we would take a step back the next couple of years before finally, I think, coming into our own. And he has the program in a really good spot now. But I think 2020, we kind of were seeing, maybe this is the start of something. And then unfortunately, because I think, NIL, COVID and things like that, West Virginia took a little bit of a step back for a couple years before now, taking a huge leap forward this past year. But I digress on all that. When you look at this 2020 team, I think it would have been fun to use a guy like Letty Brown on the game in kind of his, full form here, 1,000 yards rushing that year, 9 touchdowns, and, had a speedy guy in Alex Sinkfield. I know he would transfer out and move on to Boston College, but I think on the video game, he was a lot of fun to play with because he had some quickness to him, and you could have used a nice 1-2 punch there with those running backs. And Jarrett Dagey, not terrible ratings on the game either. And you could have also sprinkled in a little bit of Garrett Green because you had him here on the roster now as well there as a true freshman. And, you could have had some of that dual threat action as West Virginia would do some in 2020, 2021, and 2022 sparingly before he took over as the starter this past season. Receiver-wise, I think it'd been fun to use Sam James. He has a lot of speed on that roster. Of course, Winston Wright, we know before transferring out, he was a good weapon for the Mountaineers as a kick returner and as a receiver. Those two guys would have been fun to use because they probably would have had a lot of speed on the game when you look at the offense. And then when you flip it over to the defensive side, I think a lot of the things that I said about David Long, Tony Fields came in as a transfer from Arizona and was absolutely awesome for that 2020 defense. A big reason that they were, tough to play against, and it was a highly rated defense that year. A lot of people don't remember. I think that's one thing that goes unheralded about this 2020 team is they ended the year as the number 1 pass defense in the entire country, did West Virginia in 2020. So I think that certainly would have been a fun unit to play with on this video game. But enough reminiscing about players that we missed out on. Let's talk about some players that we should have a chance to play with on this upcoming version of the game, and we'll know about the ratings here in the near future and things like that. But let's take a look at what could have been this past season. Let's take a look at the 2023 West Virginia football roster on NCAA Football 14, and maybe it'll give us a sneak peek into what some ratings could look like on the upcoming game here releasing this summer. And as we get a look at this 2023 roster, obviously want to remind you guys some of the stuff that you're seeing on screen. The numbers may not be exactly accurate. I think, some players may not even be on the roster. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Hudson Clement wasn't even on the 2023 West Virginia roster on this NCAA football video game that I was able to pull up here and showing you guys on the screen. But nonetheless, it gives you a little bit of a glimpse of some people that we could see, Garrett Green, Jaheim White, C.J. Donaldson, Traylon Ray, among others, that will be on the game this upcoming year. And what's fun about this, when I'm showing you guys these rosters, obviously this was a time, the last time we had an NCAA football game released, that you had to go on, you had to wait for someone to go through, edit the rosters, put all these players' names on, put them in the right positions, make all these edits, and then you go on, download a roster, and then you can play. So sometimes it would be, a week or so you're waiting to play the game because you want to have the names, unless you want to take the time and go through and edit your favorite team yourself, which of course I would do often with West Virginia. But what's going to be fun this year is all the players are going to come on the game already. All the players are going to have the option. They're going to go onto an app. They just opt in. They have to sign some paperwork. They use the headshots that are on the individual, university team rosters, and use that to put their face into the game and use all their, likeness and all that. So when you pop open the game, it's not going to say quarterback number 6. It's going to say Garrett Green. It's going to have his ratings, and you're going to be ready to go with West Virginia. So that's what's going to be fun here when this game releases this summer. But that's just a sneak peek at some of the ratings that we could see as we scroll through this roster. I know there's a lot of players West Virginia fans will be excited to play with on EA Sports College Football, and we're going to finally get the chance to. And as we talk about that now, I do want to take a chance and pull this up, because there has been a lot of attention given to EA Sports College Football 25, obviously now with the fact that we finally know officially it's coming this summer, getting that official teaser trailer. And one thing that people have been putting out is, expected ratings, players they expect to maybe be rated high. And you see here, I'm going to share on the screen, potentially most fun players to play with in College Football 25, a list put out by Blue Bloods Bias. And you see rated number 4 there, Jaheim White. So I think a lot of people are expecting him to be a very highly rated player on the game, probably a high, level of speed, high level of acceleration. So he's going to be fun to use, especially when you mix him in to West Virginia's offense, where he'll be a great 1-2 combination with CJ Donaldson, who I'm sure will be highly rated. And then, of course, also probably going to be highly rated, goes without mentioning, after an amazing season. And he's probably going to be, one of the higher rated quarterbacks on the game, maybe even. As you see here, Blue Bloods Bias coming out with another list here, and they're giving the top, popular quarterbacks they expect to be used in College Football 25. And our guy Garrett Green cracks the top 10 there at number 8. So you got to expect Garrett Green's going to be highly rated. I'd say 85 plus overall. He may even creep into the 90s, and we'll see what other Mountaineers end up highly regarded on the game. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. What would you rate, some of West Virginia superstars on EA Sports College Football 25? Are you going to be playing? And I always appreciate those interactions a ton there. And also want to mention something really cool about this game is the fact that EA Sports, has been sending out requests to programs about their traditions on game day, so that they will, respond with, everything that they want to be included on the game. Obviously, they're sending them their uniforms they want to be included. So we know West Virginia is getting a new uniform set in 2024. Obviously, that's probably going to be on the EA Sports College Football 25 video game. I would 100% expect that. So when West Virginia unveils their new uniforms at the spring game, you'll probably see those in the college football video game, and maybe even any alternates as well. West Virginia, I'm sure, submitted a lot to EA Sports, as well as traditions wise. You'll probably be playing the game, and when we get a first down, you might hear our first down chant. After a West Virginia win, you could hear Country Roads. I'm sure stuff like that has been submitted to EA Sports, and they're trying to do all they can to put that pageantry into the game. So be sure, if you're a West Virginia fan, if you're a video game fan, if you're a fan of, the college football series and you didn't know, the game's definitely coming back. West Virginia is going to be featured, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But if you're into that type of stuff, especially college football, the college football video game, I'd ask you to do me another favor here. I don't do this a ton on the CRW, but I do have another YouTube channel, JC's Pop Culture, where I talk about this video game a ton. I've been putting out update videos. I'll pull up one of the first ones there, but I've got 5 or 6 update videos on EA Sports College Football. So if you're into this, I'll be updating it further on this other channel, JC's Pop Culture. I'll pop a link to it in the video description if you want to go over there and subscribe. Also, if you're into movies and TV shows, I talk a ton about that, especially horror movies, comedy, superhero, and stuff. But if you're into EA Sports College Football 25, be sure to follow my other channel, JC's Pop Culture. We'll be talking about it a ton. But as far as West Virginia is concerned, I'll definitely be providing updates here on them and EA Sports College Football 25 leading up to the release as well. Like I said, I'm sure player ratings and stuff will start coming out in the near future. And as they do, I'll try and talk about those here on the Country Roads Webcast channel as well. So if you're a WVU football fan and you haven't already, be sure to subscribe here. And if you made it this far through the video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. Like I said, helps a ton with the YouTube algorithm. As always, I'm Jordan Cruz. I appreciate you tuning in to this episode of the Country Roads Webcast. And until next time, let's go Mountaineers.